Hello and welcome back to another episode of the College 12 Pack. I'm your host, Tyler Natuno, and with me, as always, is Duke Wire managing editor Ryan Haley. Now, Ryan, we got our first taste over the weekend. We kind of got enough to tide us over for a few days of college football, but this weekend is really when we get into the full swing of things, and we're here today to preview what is a pretty meaty week one. Maybe not the best week one slate we've seen in the last few years, but definitely some really interesting. Yeah, it's top heavy, and there's some really interesting matchups, and I think a great game in pretty much every window on Saturday, and a couple interesting ones on Thursday and Friday night too. So we're surely going to get into all of that, talking about the games that we're most excited to watch this weekend. But first up, we got some news regarding one of our favorite coaches to talk about here on the College 12 Pack. We love to show him some love. Clemson coach Dabo Swinney kind of made headlines this week once again. They're ending
he does in his nature.
As he does. That is, it just is what it's as natural as breathing air to him, making headlines. But this time it's they're canceling the call-in portion of his weekly radio show, moving to a text and email format where questions are going to be sent in ahead of time. Now, obviously, this comes in the wake of last season when they had their 4-4 start, the whole Tyler from Spartanburg thing. If you don't remember that, if you don't remember that, a guy called in and basically asked Dabo why they're paying him $11.5 million a year to be 4-4. And Dabo went on like a 6-minute rant, basically saying that he was everything that's wrong with the Clemson fan base and the expectations and all that. It was something. And guess
that
what?
Was they the most surreal. Well, like if I had to pick like what moment from the 2023 college football season feels the most like a fan fiction, like feels the most like a fever dream, it was like Dabo going in a 5-minute rant about Tyler from Spartanburg being what's wrong with the state of the sport.
And not to go like full tinfoil hat here, but like I'm still not entirely convinced that it wasn't a plant. That let Dabo kind of get on his soapbox for a few minutes, and then they won out. Like it worked. I mean, I don't know if you can directly attribute it to that, but they won their next 4 games and finished the season, or won their next 5 games, finished the season 9-4. I mean, maybe this is not a charitable way to read this. Maybe I'm being unfair here, but like, does this not seem like it's potentially just setting up for avoiding another Tyler from Spartanburg situation if this team disappoints yet again?
It's 100% weak. It's so weak.
Yeah.
I mean, like that's not to like throw out the most like old head take, but like that's what the money's for, man. You won 2 national championships. You get $11 million a year to face questions. Like that's the deal. Like if you're going to advertise yourself as like the second best coach of the last decade in the sport, that was what frustrated me when Dabo went on the whole like you better buy Clemson stock now after they beat Notre Dame thing when they went to 5-4. Like, sure, people were like leaving Clemson for dead, and maybe it's a bit premature to like declare that team no longer relevant in the national picture. But you get $11 million to call a 9-4 season a disappointment. That's the deal. That is straight up what the arrangement is in Clemson right now. And Dabo trying to make it everybody else's fault for saying that a like kind of mediocre start is like the end of the world. And like the first time this has ever happened to him, it's the first time since 2010 he's lost less than 10 games. Like it's just like you don't get to get the like one of the most lucrative contracts in college football and also say that fans can't question you if you aren't a 10-win team. Those two things kind of go hand in hand to me.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's fair. And I mean, a lot of these coaches have stopped doing these call-in shows for probably pretty similar reasons to this one. But I mean, the thing here to me that like is just so, and this is a bigger discussion obviously than the radio show, but like, it's not like these frustrated Clemson fans are just sitting here like throwing their hands up in the air. Like, we love you, Dabo, but like, this isn't working. We need to figure out what's going wrong here. Like, everyone knows what's going wrong here. Everyone knows what the problem is here. It's incredibly obvious, and it stems from
everybody except Dabo.
Yeah, well, I think Dabo I think he understands that that's limiting them. I think it's a stubbornness thing. I think he'd rather go 8-4 his way than go 11-1 doing what everyone else is doing.
Tyler, unrelated to the little plaque hanging on your wall there, does a coach who would rather lose more games coaching his program the way he wants instead of adapting to some element of the recruiting trail and like getting combative with the media who ask him about why he's not doing? Does that sound familiar at all? Does that ring any bells to you in any
No,
capacity?
it honestly doesn't.
Yeah,
Nothing at
I've never heard
all.
of a
But
situation like that before.
I will say, if something like that were to hypothetically happen, you would think that coach might not be too much longer for their
No,
current job.
no, that God, I did not have "Does Dabo Swinney reflect 2021 Dan Mullen" on my bingo card. That was not on
Here
my
we
call
are.
sheet 24 months ago. And that's like kind of what it feels like now. It was like a coach who gets kind of combative when he gets questioned, despite everybody in the world being like, you just have to do this one thing, dude. And he's like, no, I don't want to do that.
Yeah, 100%. And they go into this year, I think, needing to silence those criticisms. And they have to start it off.
Especially now that Florida State's lost.
Exactly. The expectations are only higher, and they have to start it off in about the most difficult way they possibly could, which is, I think, why this is interesting to me, because this leads us into the first game that we're going to talk about this weekend at noon on ABC on Saturday. Clemson facing Georgia at Mercedes-Benz Stadium in Atlanta.
Neutral
site. Neutral site. Yeah, that's tough. I mean, Clemson's close. Clemson's like an hour and a half from Atlanta.
Sure,
so it's not like that's like impossible, but yeah, there's so many UGA fans.
Yeah.
Yeah.
No thanks.
And I mean, you got to think that in all likelihood, Dabo is probably going to be happy he doesn't have that call-in show next week. Wouldn't you think?
Yeah. I know we're not just here to, I know we're here to provide more analysis than this, but it's stunning to say, like, talk about moral victories with a team that's won 2 championships since 2016. If Clemson keeps this within 1 score, I think that's a very promising sign going forward. Like if they lose by single digits, I think that's a positive for Clemson.
Yeah, I totally agree. I mean, obviously winning this game would be massive. I don't think that's a fair expectation. Like, I don't think granted the criticisms of Dabo that we both share, like, I don't think it's fair to expect them to win this game at this point. No. I would definitely like to see some signs of life, though, here. I think particularly from the offense. I think so much is going to depend on how that unit looks this year, especially with Cade Klubnik. And this is about as tough a first test as you're going to get. The offensive line here has been so strong under Dabo, but the last year it was not. They really struggled, gave up a lot of sacks, did not have a very efficient run game. Can that change this year? I mean, Phil Moff is back, who's a very good running back. They did lose their leading rusher in Will Shipley, but that's, decent. That's like a decent guy.
Forever.
I know he was. And Maffa got to play some last year because I think he missed a couple games due to injury. So we've seen Maffa. He's a good running back. But like if you can't, I understand it's Georgia and probably the best defense they're going to play this year. But like, this is Cade Klubnik's second full year as the starter. Like, you're going to see if this offense is taking a step forward. I think you're going to see at least some signs of that on Saturday.
That's the issue with everything you just said is like Phil Moff is a very good running back and Clemson has a lot of talent on defense, but we saw the blueprint for Cade Klubnik as a starter with a very good running back and a talented defense last year, and it was 9-4. Mm-hmm. And that was what it ended up being. And so I don't necessarily, sorry, I got a phone call and it screwed up my screen. But I don't necessarily think that, I'm sorry, I just want to like run through that again. It took, like, I have this full screen and it like completely exited the StreamYard because I got a scam call. Okay. Yeah, but I mean, the issue with that is we saw what a Cade Klubnik team with a good running game and a talented defense looked like last year, and it was 9-4, and it was a bowl win, and it was unimpressive to start off, and it was a 3-score loss to Duke in week 1. And so that's like, it all comes down to, does Cade Klubnik look better in year 2? And I think a big part of that is going to be if Tyler Brown is going to be a sophomore receiver, if he can take a step forward. He had 531 yards and 4 touchdowns as a freshman last year. He had 153 against Syracuse. But if you look at Cade Klubnik against Notre Dame and Florida State, who I still think are probably a tier below what this Georgia defense is going to look like, but those 2 games against the FBS defenses that you can really say are like comparable, He completed 59% of his passes, averaged 6.1 yards an attempt with 2 touchdowns and a pick. Like, that's going to have to be better if you're going to play. Like, that's going to be what. And it looked last season, and this is like, I did not watch every minute of Clemson football. I won't pretend that I did, but it looked very robotic and indecisive, which is not a good combination for a quarterback with that level of talent. It looked like somebody who was trying to play football correctly and trying to make sure he was checking boxes in his head to play football correctly instead of just reacting to what was in front of him. And that's a very bad sign.
Yeah, and I think there's been moments with Klubnik where you see why he was a 5-star quarterback. Like he's made some really nice plays. But yeah, I think you're right. I think from a processing perspective, and I think that's a good way to put it. He doesn't necessarily feel like he's playing loose all the time. And I mean, maybe that's a function of the offensive system. I mean, they brought in Garrett Riley last year. It didn't really feel like to me, though, that resulted in a fundamental shift. Yeah, I mean,
they brought in Garrett Riley to run the Clemson offense, as Dabo.
That's what I'm kind of getting at. Like, it looked like the same offense they were running before. Like maybe a few new bells and whistles here and there, but like it doesn't really seem like that fundamentally changed the scheme and the way this offense runs.
At a certain point, you kind of need to ask, like, Clemson had a good offense for 6 seasons, and it was Deshaun Watson and Trevor Lawrence. And every other year, the Dabo Swinney tenure, it's been like, is the offense good enough?
Yeah.
And at some point, that might just be like the kind of coach that he is, and he just happened to luck into 2 of the 5 best college quarterbacks of the last decade. Not luck into, you still pull them on the trail. They were all-time recruits, but like that was what those 2 guys were. And like they could elevate it, and anything less than that hasn't been able to in Clemson.
Mm-hmm.
If you want 2 Georgia, do you still have any more Clemson thing? I do have 2. Like, I do want to touch on 2 Georgia guys, just instead of like talking about how great they are.
I have a couple Georgia points too. All I really want to add about Clemson is that like we're mostly focusing on the offense because that is the bigger question. You know, their defense has been year in and year out very good under Dabo. Even when Brent Venables left, it's still been very solid. Now, granted, they lose a ton of production on that side of the ball. Like, I think that it's possible we see some drop off defensively. Now, the one thing I will say is the front 7 and the defensive line in particular looks like it's a real strength for this team once again. And I think that's going to be interesting against a Georgia team that may or may not have Trevor Etienne in this game. Got the offseason DUI. There's been reports that he could be facing a suspension. I have not seen anything definitive on whether he's going to be available for this game or not. By the time you're listening to this, there may be something definitive there. But as of recording, I don't think there is. So I am curious to see, especially if they don't have Etienne, if this front 7 can actually, contain the run and not just get bullied.
Yeah, with Kirby's track record, I'd be shocked if we know before like Georgia's first offensive snap and whether Etienne's on the field or not. Like, I think that's probably going to be when we end up finding out if he's been suspended internally. I don't necessarily think Kirby's going to make a public statement ahead of the game, even if he gets asked. But yeah, no, that's the Clemson blueprint. That's been the Clemson blueprint for a decade now. Is the front 7 good enough to hinder any offense they play? And this is a team that lost a lot of talent on the offensive end, but on the defensive end too. And they're like, this is what we talked about with Dabo in the transfer portal, is like, now instead of getting guys that were productive at a different level or productive at a different school last year, you're relying on 4 and 5 stars looking like who they looked like in camp. And that's just a less reliable way to make sure you're getting genuinely productive players.
Yeah, no, I mean, absolutely. And I think looking at this Georgia team now, I think like I'm curious what this offense looks like, because I think we saw it elevate to a degree with Carson Beck last year. I think he's a step up from what Stetson Bennett's capable of doing. I'm curious now, year 2 as a starter, does this thing open up even more? I mean, we know what Kirby wants to do. Like, we know Kirby wants to run the ball. We know there's going to be a ton of 12 personnel. But I am curious, like, if this offense can open up a little bit, because again, like, they just lose. Like, we think they're going to be good, but they lose so much on both sides of the ball, like they do every year. Like, can the defense just stay elite year in and year out? Like, probably. But I think I would like to see this Georgia team become more potent offensively, because I think they were taking steps in that direction last season.
Yeah, I think that's going to be another, like, talking about quarterbacks and whether they take a step forward or not. Carson Beck is as close to a consensus QB1 as you can get in this like class is just shaping up to be a little weaker than a usual quarterback class, but he's probably the top name in like 60% of draft boards as of right now. If you look at national media talking about the NFL draft, if you want to be overly critical, like now he gets to do that without Brock Bowers and Ladd McConkey, who are 2 top 35, top 40 picks in the NFL draft. Bowers, one of the best tight ends we've seen in this century so far. And if you want to be a little overly critical about how Beck looked last year, there are obviously flashes. There were great throws. He has an NFL arm. He can make throws to the perimeter. There were a few moments where it looked like he was a little late and kind of got to make a throw because McConkey got wide open because he's a great route runner, or got to make a throw that Bowers could kind of like go up and go get instead of throwing him into the spot where he was going. And that's stuff that at first year as a starter, you're being a little overly critical because you're thinking about this guy in terms of like, where does he rank in the pantheon of national quarterbacks? But he clearly looks like enough for them to win 12, 13 games and at least make the playoff. Is he enough for them to win the playoff? Probably. Felt like last year was like a 75% check in that department. Obviously, that Alabama game was really the litmus test, but holding it against a first-year starter because he couldn't beat Nick Saban in an SEC championship. And he didn't play poorly in that game by any means. They just kind of didn't have answers for Bama on the other end. But if you're looking for another name in Georgia on the defensive end, Michael Williams is an edge rusher that doesn't get a ton of playing time just because nobody at Georgia gets a ton of playing time along the defensive line. Kirby really rotates in and out pretty constantly, but he's a guy that I'm hearing pretty frequently. You talked about as someone who could kind of step up and be one of the bigger names in college football this year off the perimeter. And he gets a pretty big test against a Clemson offensive line, like we talked about, that has a good reputation, but may not be what it was 5 years ago. So he's somebody that could kind of like, I don't know how much he'll play, but he could kind of wreak havoc when he does.
Yeah, no, I totally agree. And I think, just that tradition of Georgia edge rushers, like they've had some good ones over the last few years. And I think we expect he will carry that on. One of them did, and he's having a pretty nice career for the Jacksonville Jaguars right now. No, I mean, I think like I don't want to belabor the point here too much with Clemson, but just like you mentioned the offensive line, like going back to it, that's just another one of the positions that we've seen just not able to be sustained. I think receivers one too. We've seen just the recruiting drop off a little bit, and they're not supplementing talent in the transfer portal. And while that hasn't prevented them from having, at the very least, highly recruited quarterbacks, maybe they haven't been great, but they were, both their last 2 guys have been 5 stars, playmakers on defense. But I just think there's too many areas where they're falling behind. And I think neither of us expect them to win this game, but I think I do expect that if this is a team that's going to compete in the ACC, we are going to see progress compared to how this team looked against the best teams that played last year.
I agree, but I think the issue with the recruiting is Dabo's finding out in real time just how short of a memory high school prospects have. Clemson was Alabama's second fiddle when we were in high school, but we've both graduated college by now. Like the class of 2025, Clemson was a national force when they were, 11, 12 years old, maybe 10. Yeah. That doesn't move the needle for them as much anymore. And Clemson, if Dabo Swinney is still trying to pitch Clemson as being that program, he's like, it happens really fast in college football where you're trying to tell 16, 17, 18-year-olds that you're still one of the top programs in the country. And if they haven't seen evidence of that in the last 4 years, suddenly your recruiting prowess is not quite what it was. And I don't that doesn't mean Dabo's become a bad recruiter, but going from challenging Bama and Georgia for the number 1 class every year to in the 5 to 7 range is a massive difference talent-wise.
And if they want to get back to that level, especially at a program like Clemson, that's not in the most talent-rich recruiting state in the country, that is resourced, but not to the same extent that some other, blue bloods are. If you're going to do that, you got to win big games again. And that games like this, and we'll see if they're able to get the job done in this one and surprise some people. But moving on to the next game we want to talk about, also at noon on Fox, big noon Saturday, Penn State going on the road to play West Virginia. I mean, the main thing I'm looking out for here is, what does this Penn State offense look like? I mean, we knew it was the limiting factor last year. Drew Allar was good numbers wise, but not in terms of, this offense was not explosive. It didn't open it up at all. And then they brought in Andy Kudlnicki, who if there's nothing else he did at Kansas, it's get guys open, it's be creative. And I'm really excited to see how that translates to this Penn State team that it has a lot of playmakers on offense. It's just about, can you scheme them open? And I think this is a good test against a West Virginia defense that, was not incredible last year. It was kind of middle of the road. This is a good opportunity.
Yeah, I mean, I think Drew Aller is probably I think Drew Aller might be the only Power 5 quarterback under more pressure than Cade Klubnik this year. Mm-hmm. Given everything we've already talked about whether this is a real prove it year for James Franklin and Penn State. Now that it's 12, you have no excuse for missing a playoff. And another highly touted 5-star quarterback has even more so than Klubnik, has all of the physical gifts for NFL teams to be clamoring over him. He's still kind of on the second, third round of NFL draft boards, despite a disappointing season last year. But you were a little polite. Those Ohio State and Michigan games, the Penn State offense was offensive. Yeah. But again, West Virginia last year, he went 21 for 29 for 325 yards and 3 touchdowns in the old system. And now, like you said, bringing in Konecny, got to be a bit of a handshake opening game for him. But another kind of situation like we were talking about with Florida State and Georgia Tech last week of people know that West Virginia is not on the same level as Penn State. And so it creates a bit of a lose-lose situation where if you're not up by 2 scores at halftime, it doesn't matter what happens. The entire conversation is going to be whether or not you disappointed, even if you shouldn't have. If Mountaineers fans are hoping for have an angle to get their hopes up a little bit for this game against the Nittany Lions, it's the way Drew Aller played in those games against the Buckeyes and the Wolverines, and then Jaheim White, their running back, who had 842 yards last year, didn't get a carry against Penn State last year. But in a 4-game stretch against Cincinnati, Oklahoma, BYU, and Baylor, he had 522 yards. He ran for over 200 against Cincy. Seems like he could be kind of a breakout back, especially in that Big 12 vacuum that we've talked about all year. If West Virginia fans are looking for some hope somewhere for how can we really throw a wrench in Penn State in week 1, Jaheim White has to be the plan. The start and end of the offensive playbook of just give this guy 20 carries and hope he can really establish, especially for a Penn State defense that has been a top 3 defense the last 2 years, but lost defensive coordinator Manny Diaz. He's now the head coach at Duke, and Diaz, for whatever conversation, I don't even necessarily obviously looking at Cristobal now, his Miami tenure is kind of aged better than I think it felt at the time, but regardless of anything else, Diaz can scheme a defense and can scheme a defense very well. And that's a loss that I think is kind of getting understated in terms of how it might affect that program.
Yeah, and I think you just kind of hit on a lot of the points that I was going to talk about. I think
sorry.
No, you're good. No, you hit them. They got covered. That's what matters. I think this offense does not get the credit it deserves. And especially, we'll see how things go with Tom Allen, the former Indiana coach, coming in to be the new defensive coordinator here at Penn State. Because not only do they have Jaheim White, a guy who is, was, like you said, just a weapon last year all over the field. He had 150 yards in the pass game too. And then they also bring back CJ Donaldson, who was their leading rusher, or I think he was their leading rusher. If he wasn't, he was very close to Jaheim White in terms of production last year. And honestly, is there a more underrated, is there a quarterback who had a more under the radar incredible season than Garrett Green did last year? Incredibly efficient passing numbers. Yeah, very efficient passing numbers and a true dual threat. A guy who I think had over almost 1,000 yards and 13 touchdowns rushing last year. So, I think that if this Penn State offense still has its limitations, if the Andy Konecny thing has not resulted in an overnight improvement, I could see a reality where West Virginia has a lot of offensive success in this game. And maybe Penn State can't match it. This game's in Morgantown. I think Penn State wins it. I'm not sure they win it in a way that makes us feel great about the season they're going to have. And I think they very easily could find themselves on the losing end here.
Yeah, absolutely. This is if I had to rank upset watch for the top 25, this is not tier 1. It's probably tier 2.5 of Tier 1 is red alert. You should really be worried. Tier 2 is it's somewhere between tier 2 and tier 3 of you shouldn't really be worried, but worst case scenario is absolutely in play.
Yeah. this is another, like, it's kind of I think, yeah, just so many loses in these situations where you're playing a team who you should beat, but they're also good and have some should beat soundly, but they also are good and can challenge you in ways where I think you might be weak. So, yeah, I mean, I think for Penn State to be feeling good about this game, I think you got to go out and move the ball very effectively and see that the defense hasn't lost a major step. But I think that'll take us through the noon block. Those are kind of the two biggest games there. And that brings us to the game that I know that you and I both want to talk about. We're going to the Swamp, Miami at Florida. Wow, I wrote that wrong in my notes. I wrote Miami at Florida, or Florida at Miami in my notes. Wow. Miami at Florida, 3:30 in the Swamp on ABC. I mean, I really can't spin this in a way where this doesn't feel like it's just an absolute must win for both of these staffs. I think things are going to get, I mean, both these coaches, and Billy Napier and Mario Cristobal, entering their third years, both of them have losing records through their first two seasons. It's hard to imagine that the losing coach here has a very successful season at all. I mean, I'll just be real.
Every single like Monday hot seat, Monday winners, losers, like the number one person on the losers list is going to be the loser of this game. Every single person. I mean, if Florida State rebounds and still looks like a top 25 team all year, which is probably still the most likely outcome regardless of what happened in Ireland, Florida plays 5 straight ranked teams to close the schedule, the worst of which will be either Florida State or LSU. And I don't necessarily think either of those teams are going to be rollovers at all. So this is Florida's a team that could start 5-1 and still miss a bowl game.
Yeah.
In Miami, especially after Florida State losing, probably needs 11 wins, I think, to obviously win the conference. That takes care of itself. But I don't think a 10-2 Miami team gets an at-large bid. No. And with the amount of recruiting money and NIL money that Cristobal has put into this team over the last 3-4 years, I don't know if an 8-4 season is enough to calm questions down. I know 8-4 is not enough. 9-3 might still be like a little, depending on how it looked. So yeah, and Miami has a really easy schedule, as we've talked about a couple times through ACC previews and things. But that also means that this is one of the 3 or 4 games that Cristobal's really getting graded on. It doesn't really matter if Cristobal goes 9-3 but loses the 3 biggest games of the year. That still feels like a failure. So every single winners losers thing is going to begin and end with whoever loses this game.
Yeah, and when I say the situations are dire here for the loser, it's not going to be dire in the same way. If Miami loses this game, like you said, this is maybe the third-ish hardest game on their schedule. There's a very good chance they still win 8-9 games if they lose this game. But like you said, in the ACC, that's not nearly good enough, even though it's progress. Mario Cristobal is not going to get fired if they go 8-4 this year. It's a step forward, but I don't think anyone's going to feel great about where this is going in 2025, especially considering Cam Ward's a 1-year rental at quarterback. So you could end up trying to, roll the dice with a transfer again. And if this one works out completely, that doesn't mean the next one will too. For Florida, though, it's if they lose this game, the path to 6 is tough. I mean,
yeah,
this is not even a top 5 game on their schedule, and it's a ranked opponent. Mm-hmm. You got to win this game. You got to find a way to win at the Swamp.
Yeah, I do think there's one game on Florida's schedule. We'll talk about the team later on that I think might be getting a little more attention than it maybe deserves on that schedule. But by and large, you lose this game, very real chance that Florida could be a top 30 team in the country and go 4-8.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't know if Florida as a school is going to look into the advanced metrics of where the Gators finish FPI wise if they go 5-7 or worse.
No, I think you got to at least. I think the benefit of the doubt will be extended to him if it's possible, but you got to win 6 at least. You got to win 6 at least if that's going to happen.
That's another thing too. Is we've talked all offseason about how hard Florida's schedule is. This is one of the most resource heavy programs in the entire, not just in the conference, in the entire country. Year 3, you should be making other people's schedules hard. That is,
and a lot of these games are in Gainesville too.
Yeah, and so that. I do think there's benefit of the doubt that gets deserved, but I want to make sure we're not talking about Billy Napier he's the victim of some unbearable burden. Like,
No.
like the bar at Florida, like you walked into this job knowing you were going to need to beat top 25 teams consistently, top 10 teams consistently if you wanted to be a coach that the fan base truly embraced.
Mm-hmm.
I do think Montreal Johnson, whether or not he plays, how much he plays, he had arthroscopic knee surgery earlier this month, and Billy Napier's been pretty coy about what it means for his availability early in the season. Said he's already up and moving around. Was one of Florida's top 2 backs last year. Started in 11 games. Was kind of their like veteran leader back over Trevor Etienne, who's now obviously at Georgia. Whether or not he plays is going to be a big deal. Elijah Badger, Arizona State transfer at wide receiver, following in the footsteps of Ricky Pearsall, who became a first-round draft pick. But he's had more than 1,500 yards and 10 touchdowns the last two seasons with the Sun Devils. Then you got Eugene Wilson, who's like a 500-yard receiver as a true freshman. There are weapons on the Florida rock. Like, that's kind of the weird thing is, like, there's a, like, path. Like, there are a bunch of coin flips in the Florida roster. Cormani McLean at defensive back, Badger, Graham Mertz at quarterback, like, kind of really stepping forward as more than just a bit of a game manager. Like, he did show flashes of having some downfield potential and having a live arm last year, even though he mostly was kind of executing the offense within, like, in front of the sticks. There are a lot of coin flips on the Florida roster where 4 or 5 of them hit. Like, if you get 4 or 5 that land on heads in a row, this could be an 8-14. Like, that's not out of the realm of possibility that this team is just better than we've all been giving them credit for because of a few offseason additions and because of a few young guys getting better. I think LJ McCray is like a 5-star defensive lineman, could be an impact guy right away. There's a path in which Florida is just kind of better than we realize, and we've kind of all been ignoring them because of 5 and 7 last year, but I don't think it's like the most likely path. It's like a bunch of yes or no questions have to be yes.
I mean, I think my party line on the Gators all offseason has been, I think this roster is in a pretty good spot, at least at the top. I think there's very few positions where you just go, this is a glaring weakness. But with that being said, there's also very few where you have considerable depth. And staying healthy is going to be so key for the Gators this year. And I agree with you. I think Montreal Johnson playing, I don't want to be like overly dramatic here, but I kind of feel like it's everything. That is not an area where you can afford to have injuries this season, given the way Billy Napier likes to play football and the way this team has relied on the run the last couple seasons, especially with Trevor Etienne now playing for your biggest rival up in Athens. And my concern here, especially if Montreal can't go, but even if he does, is, you know, maybe the iffy things we've been hearing out of camp about the offensive line, multiple transfer starters here, which you know how I feel about that. It's a big question.
You're consistent there.
Yeah, and you're playing against a front four that is the strength of this Miami team. You know, with Ruben Bain coming off the edge, Simeon Barrow, a really good transfer from Michigan State. Yeah. It's going to be tough if that offensive line doesn't hold up. And it's going to be tough. You know, I think the big thing we want to see from this Florida offense this year, because Graham Mertz was hyper efficient and did pretty well last year, all things considered, but this was not an explosive offense. This was not an offense that attempted a ton of air yards or took a ton of shots down the field. That needs to change, I think, this year for this team to take a step forward. It's going to be hard to do that if you've got a shoddy offensive line just getting absolutely brutalized by this Miami front. So that to me is like the main thing I want to see here, because I mean, honestly, I think Miami does have the better roster on paper, but I do have a lot of questions because of just how many newcomers. Like Florida's questions are, will these true and redshirt freshmen who saw a ton of significant snaps last year develop quite a bit? Whereas Miami's question is, can a defense of proven transfers and a guy in Cam Ward who's coming into a new system but has been very productive in his career despite some turnover issues, like, will all these pieces gel together? I don't know. So that's kind of the case I could make for the Gators, especially if the defense has taken steps forward. You know, they brought in Ron Roberts from Baylor to be the executive head coach of the defense, whatever that means. We're kind of hearing rave things about the secondary with guys like Jordan Castell, who played a lot as a freshman last year, you know, guys like Devin Moore coming up. Like, there are the pieces and there is the potential. And I think it's just a matter of how much better have these guys gotten since last season.
there are great things about the secondary. Then you have to ask, like, do they look good? Is that more of a commentary on Florida's passing game that the secondary looks that good in
It could be.
scrimmages?
I mean, I think the
I think
receivers are better than they were last year. I don't think there's any doubt about that.
I 100% agree. I think the only weak defense I can make about Billy Napier as an offensive play caller thus far is that the reason that he's so timid and the reason that he leans on quick game and screens and kind of gimmicky line of scrimmage plays so often is because the offensive line couldn't hold up to allow Graham Mertz to consistently attack downfield.
Is that why, or is it just what he wants to do?
I said a weak defense, not that I believed in. I said one that exists. This is not necessarily my thoughts on Billy Napier's offensive play calling, but I don't necessarily know if that's changed. Like if one guard or center, if your center or one guard goes down, this whole team just becomes like bubble screens to Eugene Wilson and slants by Elijah Badger down the field, and like maybe some pitches and halfback dives. Like I agree with you. I don't necessarily have a ton of faith in Trayon Webb and KD Daniels carrying the load against this Miami front. Not for nothing, I played a college football 25 game as this Florida team with no changes to the roster against this Miami defense, and my running game had -3 yards before contact. So that could I averaged 18 yards on 21 carries. That could very well be what ends up happening. And if that happens, I don't have any faith in the Florida offensive line. Like as much as I like the Florida receiving core, like the offensive line is the biggest coin flip and everything that I just talked about like, is there an 8-4 team somewhere on this roster? Yes. Like if the offensive line is SEC average this year, I think this could be a better team than people are really truly giving it credit for in the preseason. I just don't know how much faith I have in that happening.
Yeah, no, I agree. I think because I think the offense was good enough to win games last year, but it wasn't necessarily where you want it to be ideally. Obviously the defense was abysmal, and that's the reason they lost as many games as they did. I think, we're going to find out, I think pretty quickly if this defense has gotten better, because Cam Ward, despite we'll see if they can force turnovers and some mistakes from him, but he can make plays, and certainly that receiving core of Xavier Restrepo and Jacoby George and company can make plays. Certainly Damian Martinez, 1,000-yard rusher last year, can make plays on the ground. So we're going to find out pretty quickly. To me, and maybe this is an oversimplified way of viewing this game, but I think it's going to kind of come down to which team makes the fewest mental and coaching mistakes, because we've seen that cost both of these teams. Both of these teams lost games. Miami literally lost a game 100% due to coaching last year against Georgia Tech. Florida had some really questionable decisions in that loss to Arkansas that ultimately kept it from going to a bowl game last year. And if they win that game, the vibes are at least probably a little bit different right now.
I would throw the entire second and third quarter against Florida State. I would hold that in just as much contempt as the Arkansas game. Billy Napier has a 2-score lead on his biggest rivals who have college football playoff hopes, and he starts throwing screens on 2nd and 15. Like that was completely offensive in terms of like what you're trying to look for as a Florida fan base for like you need to win this game to make a bowl game. You need to win this game to stop Florida State from going to the playoff, and like having a 2-score lead and trying to like play prevent effectively on offense in the second quarter was just as bad as anything in the Arkansas game.
Yeah. No, 100%. And two teams that, like we said, both are optimistic that they're going to take steps forward this year, that they can actually be competitive in their conferences. I think one of them is going to have those hopes probably pretty dashed by about 7:00 on Saturday night. But moving into,
I do want to end this note on a Miami thing. So I feel like I've talked a lot about Florida. If you gave me truth serum and said what's one take that I kind of believe, but don't necessarily want to be held accountable for, Xavier Restrepo might be an All-American this year. If Cam Ward is as productive as he's 100%. Been, this is a guy who had 1,000-yard seasons with Tyler Van Dyke. Xavier Restrepo could be a monster this year. So
this could be one of the best offenses in the country if everything goes
absolutely.
Right.
And he could be one of the best players in the country, period.
Yeah.
So I did want to at least give him a little more of a moment if we spent that much time talking about Florida. But
100%. And we could talk about that all day. So I'll try to keep us on track here and move it along into the nightcap. We got College Game Day heading to College Station for the first game of the Mike Elko era for Texas A&M. They're hosting Notre Dame. What a start, 7:30 on ABC. That's a fascinating way to start the Mike Elko era. I think this A&M team, like it's hard. It's hard to know because they portaled very heavily. Obviously, lost some really key guys like Evan Stewart, Walter Nolan, and such. But like, man, this roster looks like it's good enough to win some games this year. I think at least.
Really? Okay.
I do. I think especially the defense with like Nick Scorton and Cassius Howe, like the guys they got in the portal. I think that unit could be really, really good. We'll see about the offense, but I like Connor Wegman. I think when he's healthy, he's played well. It's going to be interesting though. Like I mean, I think we both feel the same way about Notre Dame and Marcus Freeman. I think we both really like them. And I think we both have them in the playoffs. So, opportunity to make a statement early on against a team that is probably going to be really good this year.
Yeah, I mean, I think my framing of Texas A&M, they were the opponent that I was referring to from Florida earlier. I think obviously Nick Scorton, phenomenal, one of the best defensive players in the country. I don't necessarily think this roster with a first-year coach deserves the benefit of the doubt of being ranked. I think they very clearly have one of the top 30 rosters in college football. I don't necessarily know if I would have put them in the top 20 without seeing them play.
Mm-hmm.
But two quarterbacks that are going to be really fascinating, guys who were limited by injury in 2023. Connor Wegman had an 87.2 QBR, and he has a 16-2 career touchdown interception ratio. Riley Leonard had 2,700 yards, 20 touchdowns, and 6 picks in his last full season at Duke. Both guys that are 6'3" or taller, more than 210 pounds, very prototypical quarterbacks that are dual threats and incredibly productive when they're going. And I think for Notre Dame, would you say it's fair looking at their schedule that win this game, they're kind of just running downhill to the playoff? Because the rest of their schedule, they have
I'm pulling up their schedule right now.
Yeah, the hardest opponents in their schedule are Louisville, Florida State, USC, and Georgia Tech.
Now you should win. You got to win. If you win this game, you got to win 10 at the very least. I mean, at the very least.
But I don't see how they go worse than 2-2 in that stretch.
Mm-hmm.
And I think if you beat A&M and beat the right two of those four teams, that 10-2 is enough for Notre Dame. So I think this is I don't think everything rides on this week for them. Obviously, I still think an 11-1 season gets them to the playoff, but Notre Dame could basically put their implied playoff chances at 85% or higher with a win this week, in my opinion.
Yeah.
So that's going to be a real big test for Marcus Freeman, who I think we both have a really high opinion of, but to this point has looked impressive in the games that you hope Notre Dame can win, but hasn't actually closed the door on one of them. I mean, that Ohio State game, they had 10 defensive players in the field, the most important play of the game. So a guy that I think says all the right things, does all the right things, a very good recruiter, a very good leader within that program. I don't think it's quite on the level of James Franklin or even Lane Kiffin that we've talked about, but this is a prove it year for Marcus Freeman. All the cards are sitting there for you.
Totally. Going back to A&M real quick, my whole thing with why maybe they even shouldn't be ranked. I'm not even sure I believe that, but I think they're a team that could easily win 8 games or so this year.
Yeah, that's very fair.
Yeah. And I think Mike Elko, obviously, that you follow Duke. So, he came in and just immediately was very good there. I think Mike Elko is a fantastic football coach. I really do. I agree. We'll see if this is the hire that brings a national title to A&M. I don't know about that. Just because no one has, but I think this was the right hire. I think this was a very smart hire. I think he has the chance to win some games here in year one. Looking at Notre Dame, I'd almost go as far as to say, in spite of everything I just said about A&M, I'd almost go as far as to say they can't afford to lose this game.
Ooh.
I think it gets harder. As much as I like Marcus Freeman, it gets harder to defend it when they continue to lose important games close and squander opportunities at the end of games. And I think this is one where even on the road, you got to get it done against a year one coach and a transfer heavy roster because they don't have that. Notre Dame, this is a defense filled with veterans. If you look at their projected starters, it's half of them are graduates. This is a very experienced team. They don't have a ton of new. beyond Bo Collins, who comes in from Clemson and was very good for them, and obviously Riley Leonard, like you said, they return a lot on offense. They also lost Aldrich Estime.
They got R.J. Oben, a Duke edge rusher.
Okay.
Like borderline all ACC, but other than that, yeah, I again only know that because of Duke. But yes,
yeah. But I mean, I guess I do have some questions about Riley Leonard. I believe he can raise the ceiling here. I think Sam Hartman. I was really high on the Sam Hartman move, and it looked good through the first 2 weeks. I think maybe taking him out of that Dave Clawson system just was not the answer. And maybe Riley Leonard is. I mean, I do think he's a little bit limited as a passer, or at least has not proven himself yet as a passer.
That's probably the way I would phrase it.
Yeah, but I don't
necessarily believe he will prove it. I'm not saying that because I think
he might not
prove it, but I just think the sample is just too small to really have an opinion.
But at the very least, this guy, when healthy, is a true dual threat, a true force on the ground. And that's an element this Notre Dame team hasn't had, and certainly not under Marcus Freeman, and really not in a while at all. So I'm interested in this team. Book. I do not.
I don't either. Yeah.
But I think, no, you're good. I just I like A&M. I think they're going to win some games in the SEC this year. But like, if you're Notre Dame and you start the year off losing to this team on the road, it's hard to feel great. And it's hard to feel like even with that schedule, you've got a super clean path to the playoff, because I mean, there are losable games there. And, you know, I just think all A&M really needs to do here is look like they belong on the same field. And I think that would say a lot about what Mike Elko's done in year one. To me, like Notre Dame, though, I don't know how you spin this in a positive manner if you don't win this game.
That's very fair. I think I agree with it. I think I was coming at it less from, is Texas A&M actually good, and more so like I look at that team and I see like promising signs in year one for Mike Elko and like a spunky 8-4, maybe like a 7-5 that was actually better than the record looked, rather than like a 9-10 win team. Which you could probably still be in the top 25 and go 8-4 in the SEC, especially this year. But it was more of a burden of proof thing. But yeah, no, I when you lay it out like that, I kind of agree with you. I think that if we get to the end of the year and Notre Dame has beaten USC and Florida State, it won't really matter as much. So I don't know if but I get like narratively, especially if Riley Leonard looks like good, not great, you're 0-2 on bringing in like the hottest transfer portal quarterback you could possibly land and having it work out as a playoff team like that. Whether there's nuance to be had there or not, that's a narrative that is hard to shake. Yeah,
100%. And I think there's just a lot of narratives in this game that are going to be interesting to keep an eye on. But another game that I think is literally dripping with narrative. Heading out to Las Vegas on Sunday night, we got USC taking on LSU. Now, a lot of similarities between these two teams, at least superficially. I mean, they both are replacing former Heisman winning quarterbacks. They both have new defensive coordinators this year after that side of the ball struggled quite a bit last year and proved to be a limiting factor. And I mean, I think this is a really important game for the trajectory of both their seasons. You know, LSU playing a pretty tough schedule in an expanded SEC. USC now playing a Big Ten schedule for the very first time. I think it's hard to imagine either one of these teams is poised to make a splash in their respective conferences if they don't start off by winning this game, right?
Yeah, I would agree. I think even the winner probably still has some burden of proof about like whether or not
winning doesn't guarantee you win.
I'm just saying losing, but losing guarantees you might not. Like losing guarantees you're not on that tier, especially if it's a multi-score game. Obviously you have years of experience covering the LSU football program at this point. I think obviously you have maybe the two best offensive tackles in the country, and Will Campbell and Emory Jones Jr.
Yeah. I mean, Will Campbell might be the best overall player in the country, honestly.
Yeah, 100%. And like those two are probably going to be two top 10, top 15 picks in the NFL draft come next April. What your opinion of I wanted to ask your opinion of watching Garrett Nussmeier for a few years and relief work you've gotten, because I think he's one of the biggest variables in the SEC. If he shows up and looks like, maybe not necessarily Heisman, I know they've had Joe Burrow and Jaden Daniels in recent years, but if he looks like the highs that we've seen from him in relief of this offense, like I know you lost Malik Neighbors, but still have a very good offensive line, still have a deep receiver room. do you think he can kind of be a guy who, like, he would probably need to have a close to an all SEC season for LSU to really be a heavyweight in the
Yeah.
conference this year? But do you think that's in there in him somewhere?
Yeah, honestly, like, I think he's so intriguing, man. I mean, obviously, really limited action. Like, the only time we've really gotten to see Garrett Nussmeier, at least as an upperclassman, play significant snaps was when Jaden Daniels got hurt in the SEC championship against Georgia 2 years ago, when Jaden Daniels got hurt in the loss to Alabama last season, and then obviously the bowl game, which was his only start, and he was very good in that game, led a game-winning drive, threw for almost 400 yards and 3 touchdowns. I mean, he's a guy who is going to be very different than Jaden Daniels. I mean, I think that goes without saying. He's not a guy that's going to run for 1,100 yards this year. That's just not part of his game. I think he is really intriguing, though. You know, he's earned a reputation as a gunslinger, which I think is maybe not quite fair. I think he's tempered that a little bit over the last year or so. I think when we saw him in the bowl game, I mean, obviously he was a gunslinger. He threw a lot of passes, but I think he's playing with, I think he played within himself pretty well in that game, all things considered. But I do think it is something you have to worry about, you know, with the decision making, you know, how will he handle that just with such limited experience? But like, man, I think this LSU offense is just designed for quarterbacks to be incredibly productive in it. And I really like, I mean, like you said, the offensive line, not only, you know, obviously Will Campbell and Emory Jones are great, but they returned 4 or 5 starters. Like, this is probably the best offensive line in the country. And, you know, losing Malik Neighbors and Brian Thomas hurts, but like, you've got guys in Kyron Lacey and Chris Hilton who've showed up. You bring in 1,000-yard receiver and CJ Daniels, who's coming in from Liberty. Like, there are the pieces here. The offense is so far from my biggest question here. I mean, will it be as good as it was last year? Maybe not. For that to be the case, they're going to need to have more production from the ground game. They didn't have to really with Jaden Daniels because he did so much of it himself. They're going to have to rely on that a lot more this year. Truthfully, though, like, I think he easily could have that good of a year. It's just about the defense, man. They were so bad last year. And I think new defensive coordinator Blake Baker, you know, obviously coming in from Missouri, becoming the highest paid assistant coach in the country, they expect big things from him. This unit didn't really turn a lot around, though. Like, not only a couple portal guys here and there starting, and losing, you know, some key guys on the defensive line. You know, really need to see Harold Perkins have a big year after he was a little quieter last season. I think the offense is good enough for this team to be among the better teams in the SEC if the defense takes a step forward. I just think that's a really big if.
Is there any smoke about Harold Perkins kind of going back to more of a pass rushing edge? I know that he like kind of moved back to off ball linebacker.
Yeah,
Wasn't
he's
really
playing off ball
last year. Oh,
so
boy.
he's playing off ball. The spin here, I mean, I'm not sure if this is real, but the spin zone here is that he was playing Mike last year for the most part. They have him playing Will now. So
okay,
you know, the theory here is that it will allow him to be, you know, do more stuff off the edge than he did last year, kind of just fly around more. We'll see. I mean, I'm not entirely convinced this guy's not just best used as a straight up like buck coming off the edge.
Yeah, it kind of feels like you're trying to use Micah Parsons as a linebacker a little bit. Is like that's just kind of like that's what he's good at. That was what he was great at as a freshman. Is like just see ball, get ball, and harass the quarterback. And I don't.
Which he still had like 5.5 sacks last year, so it's not like 100%. He didn't do that. But
100%. And when you look at the pass rush snap count, getting 5.5 out of that sample size is incredible. But it just feels like a little bit of stubbornness from the LSU coaching staff to watch him in those pure pass rush snaps and be like, no, we really think this guy's an asset in coverage. I'm not saying he's like, he wasn't great in coverage, obviously, but like, I don't understand the desire to have him do something else instead.
No, totally. I mean, we'll just have to see. They've been pretty, you know, I think they're trying to develop him into the most well-rounded player you can be for like an NFL perspective, but I don't know if that's what's best for this team winning games. So we'll just kind of have to see what his role looks like on Sunday and how it kind of develops throughout the course of the year.
Or what's best for his draft stock. Like, would you rather, if you're an NFL GM, would you rather have a guy who's like a B plus in coverage who can rush 100 snaps, or would you rather have like the best edge rusher in football?
That
like,
one. That's the one I would rather have.
Yeah, I don't necessarily think, I think I would like, if I'm looking to promote his draft status, I would rather make him the best at one specific thing than like try and make him a well-rounded player. But flipping to the other side of this conversation, I think we could end up in a really weird spot about Lincoln Riley discourse in like 5 months. If you look at the schedule, obviously you already mentioned first time in Big Ten play. Miller Moss needs to follow up a 6-touchdown performance in, I believe it was the Holiday Bowl.
Something like that, yeah.
So I might be getting that wrong. It's the one thing I didn't write down, so of course I tried to say it. But Taj Washington, who had 7 catches for 99 yards and 2 touchdowns in that game, not on the team anymore in the NFL. And now you're playing Michigan on the road. You play Wisconsin. You play Penn State. You play Washington and the Nebraska team that I think might be a little spunkier in year 2 under Matt Rule. That's obviously Washington no longer with Kalen DeBoer. Michigan no longer with Jim Harbaugh, but that's not a fun schedule. I mean, that's a really easy way to go 7-5, and I think Lincoln Riley set himself up a little bit between the way he handled media at his Oklahoma tenure, the way he handled media at USC last year, the way he handled that transition from Oklahoma to USC, and the national platform he's put himself and his programs on. I don't think any coach, like we talked about this with Dabo about getting like borderline revolts from the fan base in his mind, like after a 9-4 season. I don't think Lincoln Riley can survive going 7-5. Like he's not going to get fired, but his national reputation can't survive going 7-5 2 years in a row. And I don't really see the path to 9 wins with that schedule. With that,
I think they're going to be hovering somewhere around 8, probably. It's kind of where I see this team. I mean,
you need to get to 8 to avoid an entire offseason of is Lincoln Riley the most overrated coach in football, which won't that conversation won't get him fired, but the amount of money he's getting paid and the amount of recruits he's going to have to try to bring in, that it just becomes harder to sell yourself when that's the conversation about you. And I think you need to win 8 games to avoid that.
Yeah, I mean, I might have a slightly more optimistic vision here. I mean, I don't think I have a particularly like more optimistic vision of this team in particular. I think I kind of agree with where they're at, but I don't know. I mean, first of all, like Miller Moss, I mean, we'll see obviously, but I'm not going to question a Lincoln Riley quarterback until I have reason to. That's fair. It's the one thing he's proven he can do. 3 Heisman winners in the last like 6 years. So and a Heisman finalist. Yeah. Yep. So like that doesn't concern me. And I do think like defensively, there's reason to think they're better. I mean, D'Anton Lynn was really good at UCLA last year. They had one of the best defenses in the entire country. They portaled a decent number of starters. I think even 1 or 2 guys from UCLA. I might be wrong about that. But I think there's reason to think this group could take a step forward this year. I just think it's going to be tough. Like, I think this could and probably will be a better team than last year's was. I just don't think it might not look like that very much because just of the increase in competition you're facing.
Yeah, I agree. I think top to bottom, like starter 1 to starter 2022, like starter 22, this is going to be a better team than last year. I also think that like the reason USC got to 7 wins last year is because Caleb Williams was kind of putting on a Superman cape pretty consistently and didn't really get a ton of national credit for it because he threw a few picks against Notre Dame and didn't win 10 games again. Miller Moss can be a very great quarterback. I don't think he has the physical capability of being what Caleb Williams was. And that's not like a knock on him. Caleb Williams is one of the best college quarterbacks we've seen in the last decade, but is the gap between Caleb Williams and Miller Moss smaller than the gap of like this defense to last year's defense? I think they're pretty even, and that's a pretty scary kind of like 50-50 shot if you're a USC of like, do we need Miller Moss to be one of the top 3 quarterbacks in the Big Ten to win 8 games? Because that's a tough bar. As much as we've seen Lincoln Riley do that over and over again, that's a really kind of uncomfortable spot to be as a fan base, knowing that like that's the margin of error for your offense to be like a ranked team, not like to make the playoff.
I think that's a fair way to look at it, and that's why I am this year. I'm not like thinking this is a 9 or 10 win team. Probably, I just think that there's a decent chance we don't walk away from this season like feeling as dire about Lincoln Riley specifically as you're maybe saying that we could.
I don't necessarily think Lincoln Riley is going to be like on the hot seat at the end of the year. I just think we're going to get really annoyed by Stephen A. Smith on ESPN saying every single week that Lincoln Riley should be on the hot seat for not winning 10 games. And like that's more where I was coming from. It's like not that I think
There's
Lincoln
just going to
Riley,
be discourse.
not that we're going to have a national reckoning about Lincoln Riley. There's just going to be so much discourse about Lincoln Riley that we want Lincoln Riley to go away. And I think that's kind of a situation he kind of set up for himself with how much attention he's brought to himself and his programs over the last half decade. But like, if Lincoln Riley goes, I guess like 15-9 over a 2-year stretch would be the result if they go 7-5 or they go 8-4. If he goes 15-9 over a 2-year stretch, that's going to be viewed as not enough by a lot of people. And whether that's fair or not, or nuanced or not, doesn't really matter. It's going to be what we're hearing about.
Yeah. And I think this is a fascinating way to start the season off because of all the games we're going to talk about today. I think this is the one that I personally feel the least confident projecting. Like this is the one that I really feel like could go in so many different directions, and we'll just have to wait and see. But that takes us to the final game of the week on Monday night, Labor Day night. We got Boston College going to Doak Campbell Stadium to take on Florida State. That's at 7:30 on ESPN. I mean, straight up, this is just the moment of truth for FSU. I mean, I think we're going to find out. I mean, I'm already willing to say this team is not as good as I thought it was going to be. But I think we're going to find out whether it's just a little bit less good than we thought it was going to be, or maybe there are some serious problems here because
we're like sky is falling bad.
Yeah, because we talked about it a little bit on Monday, but this Boston College team may not be great, but Thomas Castellanos is a legit threat. As a
firecracker, dude. He rocks. I love watching him play football.
I mean, just pure volatility, like 15 touchdowns, 14 picks last year through the air, and then added 1,100 yards and 13 touchdowns on the ground or something like that. Really fun player. And like, it's not even about if they win this game. Like, I think FSU is going to win this game at home, but even if you win, if you give up like 350 all-purpose yards to Thomas Castellanos, I'm still feeling pretty bad about this situation.
This is Boston College went into Doak Campbell and lost 31-29 last year. If you do that again, even if you win for Florida State, if it's like a one-score game against a Boston College team that if you made me sit down, I probably think is less than 50-50 to make a bowl game. They probably have like a 40% chance to get to 6 wins, but I don't necessarily think they're a sure bet to even be like in the top 10 in the ACC. But yeah, you hit the nail on the head with Castellanos. They gave up 54 rushing yards to Haynes King last week, and Thomas Castellanos might be the best big threat dual threat among Power 4 quarterbacks. But he had more games with 2 interceptions than he had games with 0 interceptions. Just like I heard this, I'm stealing an analogy I heard someone use on social media about Josh Allen, the Buffalo Bills quarterback. But like he plays football like he has crayons up his nose in the playground. Like it's just kind of what he does constantly. It's just like every single play. No, every single play. But like it's just like it's going to be fascinating to see. And there's a real chance that Castellanos, like now having like a full season and a full off season as a starter under his belt, has curtailed that a little bit. And if he shows up and doesn't make that like one boneheaded play a game, it like this could very easily go poorly because this looked like the thing Florida State struggled with last week was holding the edge around Georgia Tech's offensive line and with that running game. And I think Boston College's offensive line is not as good as Georgia Tech's, and I don't necessarily think Bill O'Brien is the same coach that Brent Key is. Not worse, but like some different style. I think Brent Key is a very good guy to take advantage of that specific weakness. But Thomas Castellanos has to be like a nightmare week 2 unranked opponent if you're like, we struggled to contain the edge in the run game. That's just got like that is like the ultimate, like if you could draw up an opponent who would just be like completely keeping Mike Norvell up at night. So I think that's where this game kind of begins and ends for me. Is like, what is he going to look like against this Florida State defense?
Yeah, I mean, this like straight up, this game is like this front seven just has to be better. It has to be better than it was. I mean, obviously, this highly touted defensive line was, like I said, was pretty much MIA last week against Georgia Tech. This linebacker play was horrendous on Saturday. I mean, horrendous. Need to get that figured out this week. Got to get it figured out quickly against these guys. And like, truthfully, like this offense needs to be better. I mean, they need to figure out whether it's a DJ problem or it's not. They need to figure something out because this was just anemic. They had nothing. They had nothing.
Get downfield. Get downfield.
Yeah. And, you know, this Boston College defense ranked pretty poorly overall last year, but that was because of their run defense, which was one of the worst in the country. Against the pass, they ranked 26th. So that's not like a significant weakness for them.
26th in yards or yards allowed or yards per attempt? Okay.
Yards allowed per game. Yeah.
Okay. Want to potentially flag that as everyone was like, well, if we're averaging 5.5 yards a carry, why would we pass? But yeah, I agree with you in principle. Yes.
Yeah. I mean, again, I don't think this is a great Boston College defense, but there's one thing they were better at last year. It was against the pass.
Yeah. Yeah.
And this is a pretty easy FSU pass offense to defend, it seems, if they're going to put on, tape what they did last week. I mean, was there anything to write home about through the air other than those 2 4th down conversions? I can't think of
why would you not just play cover 0 every single snap against this team? Just have all 11 defensive starters within 15 yards of the line of scrimmage and just dare DJ to throw it over your head.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I don't have a ton more to say about this game. I think it's all pretty straightforward. I don't think this is a great Boston College team. I don't think this is a Boston College team that's going to finish in the upper half of the ACC, but it might be one that's built to be scary in this game for FSU. And if this game is even close going into the 4th quarter, win or lose, I'm going to be very concerned about this Florida State
especially if either Clemson holds their own against Georgia or somehow beats Georgia, or Miami beats Florida by multiple scores. If Florida State watches that on Saturday and then has an unconvincing win or even a loss to Boston College, it's going to feel really uneasy in Tallahassee very quickly.
Absolutely. And they've got Mike Norvell locked up for a pretty long time. So I'm not saying he's close to the hot seat, but if that situation were to deteriorate, it would not be an ideal spot for that program to find themselves.
Not even close to the hot seat, but we have seen how quickly a Florida State fan base can move from love to hatred.
Or from hatred to love. In the case of Mike Norvell.
With Mike Norvell, particularly.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying.
Yeah.
No, I don't really have a ton more to add about this.
No, that's kind of my take kind of begins and ends with how many rushing yards does Thomas Castellanos have.
Exactly.
I think that's kind of
and if it's more than 100,
yeah, exactly. It's so that's kind of all I have for that. But
yeah, totally agree.
Just one more last segment.
Yeah, I think, and this is one I think we wanted to talk about the games. We talked about the big ones, the big helmet matchups, the ones that everyone's going to be interested in and watching. We each wanted to pick a game that's kind of going under the radar this week, a more low-key game that we think could be interesting. And we have different picks here, but the logical through line with our picks is basically the same. So I'll let you lead this one off. Who do you got?
Sure. Thank you. I appreciate it. I am going with Oklahoma State hosting 2-time defending FCS national champion South Dakota State. This game, I believe Oklahoma State's favored by 9.5 against the team. So the Athletics' Dane Brugler wrote a really good feature about Mark Gronowski, the South Dakota State quarterback. I believe it was yesterday that it got published, so Tuesday, but some point this week. Gronowski's 37-3 as a starter, and over the last 2 seasons, he has more than 6,000 passing yards, 55 passing touchdowns, 18 rushing touchdowns, and 10 picks. And according to Brugler's profile, South Dakota State's offensive coordinator went to Northwestern, and obviously Gronowski could have followed him there. And allegedly, he was getting phone calls from I believe the exact quote was a high-profile ACC team looking to upgrade a quarterback. So a few teams that you could kind of circle there, but it feels like there are only 2 or 3 culprits that could possibly be. And he chose to stay with this South Dakota State team that has won the last 2 national championships at the FCS level and hasn't won them in a particularly nail-biting fashion. They beat North Dakota State, who I think is everybody's image of the FCS powerhouse at this point. They beat them 45-21 in 2022, and then they beat Montana 23-3 last year. And if you look at Oklahoma State's passing defense last year, we were talking about, they were 126th in the FBS in passing yards allowed and yards per attempt. This Oklahoma State team allowed 8.7 yards per pass last season. And now they're welcoming in the most efficient FCS quarterback who's won 37 of his 40 games as a starter. I think I know an Oklahoma State team that obviously has Ollie Gordon in the backfield, one of the best running backs, maybe one of the best players in the country, coming off some questionable things that have happened this offseason. Maybe I'm underrating how good Oklahoma State actually is. I don't see any reason this should be a 2-score game on the spread. I don't even really see a reason South Dakota State couldn't win this football game. I think this could very easily be a game that we get to Saturday night and we're like, how did Oklahoma State lose? And you kind of look into it and you're like, how did we think South Dakota State was a 9.5-point dog? I don't really understand how this spread is as big as it is.
Yeah, I love that pick. I mean, Oklahoma State's a team that is widely getting predicted to be one of the best teams in the Big 12 this year. Went to the Big 12 title game last year. This is a brutal way to start, though, man.
It is.
There's no other way to say it, playing the best team in the FCS. And it's not like we haven't seen Mike Gundy lose these games before. They lost like 33-7 at home to South Alabama last year and then turned things around and ended up punching a ticket to the Big 12 title game. So, like, they could absolutely lose this game. I agree. I think 9.5 is a pretty big spread. And I think if this were just a middle of the road Big 12 team rather than one that is projected to be in the top 3 of the standings, I think you probably would see South Dakota State being favored in this game.
Yeah, I 100% agree. And I also I don't necessarily know if I feel incredibly inclined to bet the house against an Alan Bowman-led offense.
No.
Or bet the house on an Alan. I just don't.
Yeah.
I would be inconsistent if I didn't acknowledge that there's like a 24-year-old 7th-year quarterback at Oklahoma State that hasn't really proven much already. That's typically a brand of college football player that I point out as someone that shouldn't necessarily be heralded by a Power 4 fan base.
And who was locked in a quarterback battle midway through last season with the coach's walk-on son, I believe. Yeah. Walk-on son.
Yeah. Who very famously had the clip of his hand shaking as he came into the game for his first snap.
Yeah.
I don't necessarily know if I feel incredibly inclined to. I don't know if he showed me enough last season to be like, yeah, no, why would teams not just stack against Ollie Gordon? But yeah, I think this is my tier 1 top 25 upset alert game of the week.
No, that's excellent pick. And that game is at 2 p.m. on Saturday, 2 p.m. Eastern on Saturday on ESPN Plus. And my game is a pretty similar logic here. This game's on Thursday night at on ESPN on primetime at 8. Colorado playing North Dakota State at home. No, this is a preseason number 2 team in the FCS, playing a Colorado team that is probably not going to be as good as Oklahoma State is going to be this year. I mean,
I can't believe you voluntarily wandered into Colorado discourse on this podcast. I can't believe this is
we're just going to end up talking about them. We're not even obsessing over Colorado, and we're still just going to end up talking about them on every episode one way or another.
That's what Deion does, man. Headline every day.
Give him credit. Give him credit.
Press is bad press.
No, I mean, this NDSU team is not quite the same. I talked about this last week too. Not quite the same program it's been. With that being said, still really good. Enter the year, preseason number 2. New head coach in Tim Polasek, who's coming over from Wyoming to be the OC. They had kind of a weird offseason deal where their previous coach, Matt Entz, left to be a linebackers coach at USC.
Which
not
has
great.
To make you feel unsettled.
Don't love that.
No,
don't love that. Yeah.
Linebackers coach? Ugh.
That's tough. Yeah, I mean, look, Colorado should win this game. They have the talent at the top end. They should be fine. They should win this game. However, I'll just hammer it home one more time. Entirely portal offensive line here. And I don't like that. This offensive line was awful last year. They tried that strategy. It didn't work out. This year's portal class is better on paper. But it's still a portaled offensive line against a North Dakota State team that, if there's one thing they do, it's play, physical as all get out. And that's their identity as a program. And if Shador and Travis Hunter are in rhythm in this game, they're going to score enough points that I think they'll be fine. But if the offensive line limits the ability for the offense to do anything like it did last year, if Shador's getting sacked or if not sacked, hurried every single play against an FCS team, this could get ugly. And I mean, I'm not going to pick against Colorado. I think they're going to win this game, but man, the places this narrative could go, the way the Deion discourse could devolve so quickly if they lose this game, I can't not have it on my radar. I'm going to be watching this one very closely.
100%. And I think everything you pointed out about Colorado, if this game was in December, I think I would feel better about Colorado.
Yeah, 100%.
The offensive line had 8 games to play together, but their first reps, your first reps of actual game action with consequence come against this team.
Against a top 40-ish team in the country, probably.
Yeah, that sucks. That's just straight sucks. Yeah. So yeah, I think that's really the big issue is that Colorado has so much new talent that the offense especially is kind of relying upon to take a step. Colorado doesn't have a path to the 7-8 win season that I think Dion himself would say is kind of the barometer he wants to be held to in year two. There's not a path to that without a lot of those transfers making an impact immediately, pretty quickly. And this is a very high bar to hold yourself. I mean, I think we both would agree, like, even a loss to this North Dakota State team wouldn't necessarily mean I'm throwing in the towel in the Dion era in Colorado. This is a team that I think is probably going to get better as the year goes along, especially because of how much new talent there is. But in terms of national conversation, this is not the way I would want to start the year.
No, it's tough. It feels very lose-lose because no one's going to be singing your praises if you win this game by 3 touchdowns. But if you lose, it's going to be a pretty bad spot.
I would like to point out that you said you're not picking North Dakota State. I am picking South Dakota State. Okay. I would like that on the
You're
record.
Straight up picking them. Okay.
I think South Dakota State straight up beats Oklahoma State.
I love the boldness. I'm not sure I'm with you, but I love the pick.
I think Mark Gronowski, I think every FCS quarterback prospect has the one game to make everyone be like, hey, look at that. And I think this is going to be the Mark Gronowski game.
That'd be awesome. It would certainly give us something interesting to talk about next week. But I think that's just gonna just about do it for this week's episode of the College 12 Pack. Meaty episode this week, a long one, but a lot of interesting games to talk about and games that we're certainly excited to watch on Saturday and beyond. So enjoy the weekend. I hope everyone has a great time with college football, and we'll be back on Monday to talk about all of it. So for Ryan, I'm Tyler. Thanks for watching, and we'll be back next week.